Master's wife warns the slave of a coming danger, but someone overhears everything. The storm clouds hadn't gathered yet, but the air carried that strange heaviness that made every creature on the Carter plantation restless. Even the mules shifted uneasily in their stall, stamping against the dirt like they sensed something no human voice could explain. The afternoon sun hung low, half swallowed in a haze, and the shadows across the cotton fields stretched longer than they should have for that time of day. Isaiah felt it first in his chest, a tightness, the kind that came before bad news. He'd learned to trust that feeling. A 22-year-old black man born into bondage didn't survive long on a Georgia plantation in 1844 without learning to listen to the little warnings his body gave him. Sometimes it was a prickle on the neck when the overseer rode his patrols with that thin leather crop in hand. Sometimes it was the way the wind changed before a violent rain. Today, it was something else, something heavier. He didn't know that the Carter household was already moving under the weight of a different kind of storm. Isaiah hauled a sack of feed from the supply shed, moving with deliberate quietness. He always worked that way, efficient but invisible. Being noticed by the wrong person on this land could mean punishment, or blame, or worse. And today the wrong person was in a bad mood. From the far side of the yard he could already hear Master Carter's voice, sharp and cutting like a blade sawing through rope. The man had been pacing since sunrise, talking to different men who rode in from neighboring counties. They leaned close, whispered, then rode out again. Isaiah didn't know what the meetings were about, but he knew fear when he smelled it. Fear was thick today. He tightened his grip on the sack and crossed the yard toward the smokehouse, where he'd been ordered to store the new feed. The building stood a little apart from the rest, dark wood soaked with decades of smoke and weather. Its door hung crooked on one hinge. Inside, the air tasted of salt, hickory, and dried meat. Isaiah pushed the door open with his shoulder. He froze before stepping in. Someone was already there. At first, he thought it was one of the other slaves, caught sneaking a moment of rest. But then a pale face turned sharply toward him, eyes wide like she'd been startled by a ghost. Mrs. Eleanor Carter. She stood near the back wall, half hidden by hanging strips of dried pork. Her dress wasn't the fancy kind she usually wore in the big house, just a simple blue cotton one with the sleeves rolled to her elbows. Her hair was pinned hurriedly, like she hadn't had time to do it proper. And her face, Isaiah had never seen it like that. Tight, pale, scared. She looked at him, then past him, then back at him again. "Close the door," she whispered urgently. Isaiah hesitated. When a white woman addressed a slave directly, especially the mistress of the plantation, it was usually to give an order, a reprimand, or a duty. But this didn't sound like any of those. Still, refusing wasn't an option. He pulled the door shut. The room dimmed, lit only by the faint slivers of sun that slipped through the cracks. "What you need, ma'am?" he asked, keeping his voice low and respectful. She didn't answer at first. She pressed one hand to her stomach as if trying to steady herself. Her breath came shaky, and Isaiah could see the tremble in her fingers. Then she stepped closer. "Isaiah, listen carefully," she said in a tone he had never heard from her before. "You must not be near the fields after sundown. Do you understand me?" Isaiah blinked, thrown off. "Ma'am, I got field duty at sundown. Overseer Dunn expects." "No." She shook her head quickly. "Not tonight." There was something desperate in her voice that made the hair rise on the back of his neck. She continued, whispering like the walls themselves might betray her. "My husband is angry, more than usual, and he believes someone on this plantation has been passing information to outsiders. About him, about certain dealings he has kept hidden." Isaiah swallowed. "Dealings, ma'am?" She didn't answer the question. Instead, she stepped even closer, lowering her voice to a trembling whisper. "And he thinks it's one of the slaves. He plans to interrogate you all, one by one, tonight." Isaiah felt a coldness spread through him. Interrogate wasn't a word that meant questions, not in their world. It meant rope. blame placed anywhere except where it belonged. Ma'am, I ain't never crossed the master. I ain't spoke to no outsiders. I know that, she said. But he doesn't care. He's looking for a scapegoat. And you. She stopped, drew a shaky breath. Isaiah, he blames men like you first. Silence filled the smokehouse. Isaiah's heart thudded slow and deep in his chest. He had lived with danger every day of his life, but this was different. This was personal, targeted. He met her eyes, something he usually avoided. She didn't look angry, or proud, or distant like she usually did. She looked guilty and afraid. "Why you telling me this, ma'am?" he asked softly. Eleanor glanced toward the door again, then leaned closer. "Because what my husband intends tonight is not justice. It's cruelty. And I won't stand by and let innocent blood spill to soothe his ego." Before Isaiah could answer, a sound cut through the smokehouse walls. A footstep. Then another. Slow approaching. Too close. Eleanor's face drained of color. She mouthed one word. "Hide." Isaiah darted behind the hanging slabs of meat. Eleanor stepped forward, grabbing a pair of iron hooks to make it look like she'd come for supplies. The footsteps stopped right outside the smokehouse door. For a moment, nothing moved. Isaiah felt his heartbeat pounding in his throat. Then the door creaked open. Overseer Dunn stepped inside, ducking low beneath the doorframe. His boots thumped against the wooden boards. His eyes, cold and pale, drifted across the room. "Ma'am," he said slowly, tipping his hat, but not out of respect, out of suspicion. Isaiah held perfectly still, barely breathing, praying the dried meat masked the outline of his body. Dunn's gaze lingered too long, as if he sensed something off, as if he smelled the fear in the air. "You need something in here, Mrs. Carter?" Dunn asked, voice dripping with distrust. Eleanor turned smoothly, forcing calm into her expression. "Supplies. For the kitchen." "You sure you ain't meeting someone?" Dunn asked, eyes darting around the dim room. Isaiah felt every muscle tighten. Eleanor's jaw clenched just slightly, so slightly only someone watching closely would notice. But Dunn noticed everything. "No," she said firmly. "Now, if there's nothing else." Dunn stepped farther into the room. Isaiah's heart hammered. Dunn was only a few feet away. The overseer paused, sniffed the air like a hunting dog catching a scent. "You hear something just now?" Dunn muttered. Eleanor didn't blink. "Just the door. It creaks." Dunn stared at her, then past her, then at the meat racks. He took another step, then another. Isaiah felt his throat go dry. Dunn reached out and pushed aside one strip of meat, just one, close to where Isaiah hid. Then, a distant shout from outside shattered the tension. "Dunn! Master wants you at the yard." The overseer froze. His jaw tightened in annoyance, but he dropped the meat strip and backed away. He gave Eleanor one final, suspicious glance. "Be careful where you wander, ma'am," he said. "Storm's coming, and storms bring out all kinds of trouble." Then he turned and left. The door slammed shut behind him. For a long moment, neither Isaiah nor Eleanor moved. Then she exhaled sharply. "He heard something," she whispered, "and he'll look again." Isaiah stepped forward from behind the meat racks. "Ma'am, if he caught me in here." "I know," she said, voice cracking. "That's why you must stay hidden after sundown. Do not go to the fields. And do not let Dunn see you anywhere near the yard. If he or my husband suspect you overheard anything, they will not hesitate." She pressed his shaking hand to her forehead. "This land is about to bleed, Isaiah. Something is coming, and I fear tonight is only the beginning." Isaiah looked toward the door, then back at her. "I thank you, ma'am, for warning me." Her voice softened, barely above a breath. "Just stay alive tonight." But neither of them realized yet. Someone had overheard everything, and they were already slipping away from the side of the smokehouse, running straight toward the master. The sun dipped lower, casting a copper tint across the Carter plantation. Evening hours often brought a brief, fragile quiet, workers finishing their last tasks, the overseer riding his rounds with slower eyes, the sounds of tools being put away for the night. But not tonight. Tonight the air vibrated with something sharp and invisible, a tension that made even the cicadas fall silent. Isaiah walked briskly from the smokehouse, making sure to circle far from the yard where Overseer Dunn usually lingered. His mind swirled with Mrs. Carter's warning. The weight of it pressed down on him heavier than the sack he'd hauled earlier. Danger tonight. Interrogations. A scapegoat. His name already felt written on the rope. He slipped behind the tool shed, keeping his head low as a pair of white men rode past on horses, heading toward the main house. Their boots were muddy, their coats dusty, and they spoke in quick, low tones. Isaiah couldn't catch the words, but he heard the strain in them, the urgency. Something was being planned, and he was already caught somewhere in the middle of it. He passed by the quarters, nodding quietly to Ruth, an older woman carrying water in a wooden bucket toward the communal washing table. Her eyes met his, searching. She could sense something wrong just by the way he moved. "You look troubled, Isaiah," she murmured. "Storm still hours off, but you walk like thunder already rumbling behind you." Isaiah didn't stop. Stopping meant explanations, and explanations meant more ears. "Just tired, Auntie Ruth. Long day." She narrowed her eyes slightly, but didn't press. On the plantation, secrets were too heavy to share unless necessary. He hurried on. What Mrs. Carter told him wouldn't leave his mind. Something about her face, fear without the indulgence of theatrics. She hadn't warned him to protect herself. She had done so because she didn't want to witness what her husband was planning. That alone chilled him. As he approached the rear path toward the barns, he froze. Someone was already there. A small silhouette at the far end of the path. Thin, quick, moving like someone who shouldn't be where they were. Isaiah squinted. Then his stomach dropped. It was Daniel, Master Carter's 12-year-old son. The boy moved fast toward the house, glancing over his shoulder once, right in Isaiah's direction. Their eyes met for a split, breathless second before Daniel bolted through the side entrance of the main house. Isaiah swore under his breath. If Daniel had been near the smokehouse, if he had heard anything Mrs. Carter told him, the boy was young, but not stupid. Worse, he adored his father and distrusted anyone his father disliked, which included nearly every slave on the land. Isaiah felt his pulse pick up. He needed a plan, something to buy him time. But the plantation gave no time tonight. A horn sounded from the front yard, short, sharp, urgent. Every slave on the property stiffened at the sound. The horn wasn't for supper. It wasn't for gathering crops. It was for assembling. For announcements, punishments, or accusations. Tonight, Isaiah knew which one it would be. He turned toward the barn, trying to appear calm, but his mind raced. He needed somewhere safe, somewhere out of sight when the interrogations began. But first, he needed information. He needed to know how much had been overheard. Inside the barn, the dim lantern light threw long shadows across the hay piles and wooden beams. A couple of mules snorted, unsettled by the horn's echo. Isaiah moved past them, heading toward the back, where old Ben, the stable hand, usually worked. Ben was slow, quiet, and aged like a tree, 50, maybe 60, with scars like carved river lines on his arms. He'd seen too many seasons, too many punishments, and too many good men broken for no reason. Ben looked up from the harness he was repairing. "You hear the horn?" he asked in a gravel voice. Isaiah nodded. "You know what it's for?" Ben set the harness down. "Heard talk from Dunn earlier. Something about a traitor." Carter's uneasy. "Men been riding in all day. Something's boiling, boy." Isaiah swallowed. "You hear anything about who they think it is?" Ben studied him, long, silent, and knowing. "You was skin, 'cause you scared of who it might be, or who it might become." Isaiah hesitated. "Ben, did you see Daniel today?" Ben frowned. "The boy, he was lingering round the smokehouse earlier." "Why?" That confirmed Isaiah's worst fear. Ben lowered his voice. Something happened there? Isaiah took a slow breath. Mrs. Carter. She told me a warning. About tonight. And that boy, he was close. Might have heard more than he should. Ben closed his eyes, shaking his head. Lord, child. That woman put you in danger trying to save you. Isaiah's jaw tightened. I ain't asked for it. Ben rested a hand on Isaiah's shoulder, a rare gesture between slaves who rarely had the luxury for comfort. Sometimes trouble don't need an invitation. The horn sounded again, this time longer. Ben's eyes widened. They gather in the men. You better hide, like she said. Isaiah looked around the barn. There ain't no place safe in here. Then find a place dangerous enough they won't think to look, Ben muttered. Storm comin'. They won't check every corner before it hits. Isaiah didn't like that answer, but Ben was right. The clouds overhead had thickened into dark plates of steel. A storm, real and metaphorical, was closing in. He stepped outside again, scanning the landscape. Slaves began moving toward the yard in uneasy lines, overseen by Dunn and two riders who carried long rifles. The atmosphere hung heavy with suspicion. Every footstep sounded hollow. Isaiah stayed hidden behind the barn, watching as Dunn barked orders. Nobody wanders. All men to the yard. Women and children to the quarters. Move! A small blur caught Isaiah's eye. Daniel, standing beside his father on the porch, whispering in his ear. Master Carter's expression darkened. His gaze swept the yard. Hard! Searching. Ben appeared beside Isaiah in the shadows. They looking for someone specific. Isaiah's stomach twisted. He was right. Carter pointed toward the quarters. Find the tall one, Isaiah. Bring him here. Dunn mounted his horse, glaring around. Isaiah. Step forward now. Isaiah froze, then cursed under his breath. You ain't got minutes. You got seconds. Thunder rumbled like a growl over the treetops. Isaiah's pulse hammered. The storm winds kicked up dust across the yard. Dunn scanned every face, every angle. Then his pale eyes turned toward the barns, toward Isaiah. Ben grabbed Isaiah's arm. Go! Now. But where? Ben pointed to the far side of the property, where the sloping ground dipped toward the swampy woods. Only place they ain't going in a storm. Isaiah hesitated one breath too long. Dunn shouted. There. Behind the stables. A shot rang out, the sound rippling across the yard like a violent slap. Isaiah flinched. Not a kill shot. A warning. A command. Stop, boy. Dunn roared. You run. You confess yourself guilty. Isaiah didn't wait for a second shot. He ran. His feet pounded the dirt. Wind slapped his face. Rain started in sudden, scattered droplets. Behind him, Dunn shouted orders. Horses screamed. Boots thundered after him. Isaiah sprinted toward the tree line, lungs burning, eyes stinging with sweat and rain. He didn't know what waited in the swamp or how far he could get before the riders cornered him. He only knew one thing. Mrs. Carter was right. Something terrible was coming. And now every soul on the plantation knew exactly who Carter believed his scapegoat was. Isaiah's legs carried him farther than he thought possible, driven by fear and the raw instinct to survive. Every stride sent mud splashing beneath his feet. The sky had darkened so quickly it felt like dusk had been swallowed whole. Thunder cracked above him, shaking the trees, as the storm finally broke open. Branches whipped his arms as he pushed into the woods, fighting through thorny brush and hanging vines. Rain poured like sheets falling straight from the heavens. Within seconds his shirt clung to his skin and his breath came in ragged bursts. Behind him, distant but closing, he heard the riders. Horses crashing through wet undergrowth. Dunn's furious shouts slicing through the storm. Isaiah didn't need to understand the words to know their meaning. They wanted him cornered. They wanted him dragged out alive, but broken, the way men were dragged out when somebody needed an example made of them. He ducked low behind a fallen tree trunk, sucking in air as quietly as he could. The rain hammered the leaves around him loudly enough to mask his breathing, but not loud enough to hide the sound of a horse drawing dangerously near. hooves squelched in the wet mud. A lantern glow cut through the fog and darkness. Dunn's voice boomed, furious and cold. Boy can't get far in this weather. Not without losing himself in the muck. Another voice answered, a deputy from a neighboring farm. You sure the Carter woman didn't tell him to run? Dunn spat. Don't start that. She's soft, that's all. But she wouldn't cross the master. Isaiah's stomach twisted. Even out here they were still talking about her. If anyone realized she warned him, her price might be as steep as his. Maybe worse. The horse stepped closer. Isaiah pressed into the mud, barely breathing. Dunn muttered, if the boy heard any of Carter's business, if anybody heard, Master'll burn this whole place to the ground to find which one. Another crack of thunder hid the sharp intake of Isaiah's breath. He hadn't known the situation was that dire. Carter wasn't simply angry. He was hiding something big enough to bring ruin, maybe enough to land him in jail if the wrong people discovered it. Isaiah shifted silently behind the trunk, inching deeper into shadow. The horse suddenly snorted and stomped. Dunn leaned forward in the saddle. Hold on. Something moved over there. Isaiah felt his heart seize. Dunn pulled his pistol. The lantern light swayed as the overseer nudged his horse closer. Is this how it ends? Isaiah thought. Shot down in the mud like a hunted animal? For secrets he never asked to hear? A branch cracked behind Dunn. The overseer jerked around, gun raised. Then a deer bolted from the brush, eyes wild, hooves kicking up mud. It sprinted right across Dunn's path, almost colliding with the horse. Dunn cursed and dropped the lantern to steady himself. For a moment, everything was chaos. Light swinging wildly, horse rearing, rain pounding harder. Isaiah didn't wait. He pushed deeper into the swampy woods until Dunn's curses faded behind him. The mud sucked at his shoes. Water pooled around tree roots. The ground became unstable enough that every step felt unsure. He pushed through until he reached the darker thicket, where the trees grew tall and heavy, and the forest floor dipped toward the marsh. The horses wouldn't follow him there. They couldn't. He crouched beneath a giant cedar, rain thrumming against its thick branches. His chest heaved. His entire body trembled from exhaustion, fear, and cold. He curled inward, trying to force breath back into lungs that felt barely his. He had escaped for the moment, but he knew Dunn. Dunn was the type to search until he broke an animal, even if it took hours. And when Dunn returned empty-handed, the master's anger would grow into something uncontainable. Isaiah leaned back against the cedar trunk. Water dripped down his face. The storm continued its violent tantrum, but for the first time in hours, he felt a tiny sliver of stillness. Then he heard something. A twig snapping. Soft, deliberate. Isaiah's muscles tensed again. Maybe one of the riders dismounted and followed on foot. Maybe the overseer was circling back. Maybe. He didn't finish the thought, because through the sheets of rain, a different figure emerged. A woman's silhouette. He blinked hard, not recognizing it at first. The storm blurred her outline. She wore a dark cloak that clung to her body, hood pulled low over her head. She stumbled slightly on the wet roots, but kept moving toward him with surprising determination. Only when she was close enough for the lantern glow from far behind to catch her face did Isaiah feel his breath catch. Mrs. Carter. Her hair was soaked, her dress hem coated in mud. She looked nothing like the composed mistress of the plantation. She looked frantic, terrified, and trembling. She nearly collapsed onto him. Isaiah, she gasped, voice shaking. You shouldn't be here. They're hunting you like you're a criminal. Isaiah steadied her by instinct, though he kept his hands respectful and low. Ma'am, why are you out here? You can't be following after me. I had to, she whispered. Rain streaked down her cheeks like tears. I had to find you before Dunn does. He shook his head. Ma'am, you ain't safe out in these woods. You're not either, she whispered back urgently. And it's my fault. Isaiah stared at her. Your fault? She swallowed hard, voice dropping to barely more than a fragile breath. Daniel overheard us. Isaiah froze. He ran straight to his father, she continued. He told him you and I were together in the smokehouse, that we were speaking privately. Her voice cracked fully now, panic trembling beneath the words. Carter thinks you're hiding something. He thinks I'm hiding something. Daniel convinced him you're the one leaking information. Isaiah's blood turned to ice. He expected the master to blame him. Isaiah knew a scapegoat's face was easy to choose. But Mrs. Carter being dragged into suspicion? That wasn't supposed to happen. A loud shout echoed through the woods, closer than before. Dunn's voice spread out. Boys in here somewhere. Mrs. Carter's breathing hitched in fear. Isaiah whispered sharply, "Ma'am, you need to go back. If they catch you out here with me." "I can't go back," she snapped in a hoarse whisper. "Don't you understand? Carter thinks I've turned against him. If I return alone, he'll question me. He'll interrogate me too." Isaiah grabbed her arm more firmly than he ever dared touch a white woman. "If they find you with me, the both of us ain't making it out." She trembled, water dripping from her hood. "I don't know what to do, Isaiah. I've never seen my husband like this. He's become unpredictable." More voices in the distance. Dunn shouting orders. A dog barking, short, eager barks. Mrs. Carter flinched. They brought the hounds. Isaiah felt panic spike through him. "They ain't using 'em in a storm like this, are they?" "They don't care anymore," she whispered. "Not tonight." A long silence hung between them, filled only by the storm's relentless assault and the sound of hunters closing in. Isaiah realized something as he looked at the terrified woman shivering before him. She hadn't come out here to save herself. She'd come to try to save him, even though doing so put her life, her marriage, her reputation, everything on the line. He took a slow breath. "What else you know about what's happening, ma'am?" She hesitated. Her lips trembled. The truth sat behind her eyes, one she didn't want to speak but could no longer hold. "There is something more," she whispered. "Something I haven't told you yet." Thunder boomed. Dunn's voice got closer. The hounds barked again. Mrs. Carter looked at Isaiah with eyes full of dread. "My husband, Isaiah," she began, voice barely holding together. "He isn't just angry. He's hiding something violent. Something illegal. Something that could destroy anyone near it." Her voice broke completely. "And you were never supposed to know." Isaiah stared at her, cold water dripping from his chin, heartbeat thundering inside his ears. "What is he hiding?" he asked. She opened her mouth. Then a violent crash of underbrush sounded behind them. A lantern beam sliced through the darkness. Dunn's voice thundered through the trees. "I see him." And just like that, the storm became the least dangerous thing in the woods. The next days unfolded under a sky that felt too bright, too calm, almost mocking the fear simmering beneath every quiet moment. Elias kept his head down and his hands busy, but his mind stayed fixed on the night in the smokehouse, the warning, the whisper, and the shadow that had moved just outside the door. He carried it like a stone in his gut, heavy and unyielding, and moved through the house quietly too, quieter than usual, speaking only when necessary, avoiding long glances toward Elias even when their paths crossed. Yet something in her posture, stiff shoulders, a tension around her mouth, told him she was just as uneasy. She had every reason to be. A white woman caught whispering to a black slave about danger. It didn't matter what the truth was. People didn't need truth to start fires. They only needed a spark. And someone had been standing at that door. On the third morning after the storm, as Elias hauled feed to the livestock pens, he felt eyes on him. Not the casual watching of overseers ensuring work was done properly, nor the suspicious glare common from those who saw him as little more than property. No, this gaze was different, focused, intent, measuring. When he turned, he caught a figure leaning on the side of the carriage barn, arms crossed. It was Tom Whitfield, the neighbor boy, the one whose silhouette he glimpsed the night of the storm. Tom wasn't really a boy anymore, maybe 20, tall as a fence post, with that sharp, narrow look some men got when they spent more time judging than working. He pushed off the wall when Elias noticed him and sauntered over with a grin that wasn't friendly at all. "Mornin', Elias," he said, his drawl long and slow. "Working hard, I see." Elias kept his tone even. "Yes, sir." Tom looked him over, eyes sliding over Elias's face, then drifting toward the house windows. "You were in that smokehouse during the storm, weren't you? I heard folks saying you was trapped in there." Elias felt the shift immediately, the way Tom watched him, the hunger for something scandalous. "Yes, sir," Elias said carefully. "Wind knocked some things over. I waited it out." Tom raised a brow, leaning just a bit closer. "Alone?" The word carried an edge. A blade hidden in cotton. Elias didn't answer fast enough, and Tom's grin widened. "Funny thing," he continued, voice dropping low. "I was walking by, checking on some of the horses that night. Didn't expect to see two shadows in that smokehouse. Big one, probably you. Smaller one, looked like a woman." He paused. "Looked like Mistress Anne." Elias's heart thudded once, hard. His face stayed blank, but inside, every memory of the night replayed in frantic flashes. He said nothing, because the wrong answer, any answer, could be used against them. Tom liked that silence. He let it sit, savoring it. "You know," Tom whispered, stepping close enough that Elias could smell the chew tobacco on his breath. "Folks wouldn't take kindly to a meeting like that." He chuckled, shaking his head as though enjoying a private joke. "Wouldn't take kindly at all." Elias swallowed, throat dry. "Sir, I—" But Tom lifted a hand. "I ain't accusing you of nothing." He smirked. "Not yet." Then he walked off, whistling as though he'd merely asked about the weather. Elias didn't breathe until the man disappeared behind the barn. And when he finally inhaled, the cold air burned in his chest. This wasn't suspicion anymore. This was danger. Real, sharp, and closing in. That evening, when the sun dipped behind the pines and found him near the well, she didn't say his name, didn't even call to him. She just approached slowly, nervously, glancing around as if afraid someone watched from every window. "Elias," she whispered, "I need no. We need to talk." He set down the bucket, stepping back. "Ma'am, it's dangerous for you to come out here." "It's already dangerous," she murmured. "More than you know." Her face looked pale in the dimming light, not from sickness but fear. "Did someone speak to you?" Elias asked quietly. She hesitated. "I overheard my husband earlier." Tom Whitfield stopped by. They were talking in the front room. "I couldn't hear everything, but—" Tom said he saw someone slipping toward the smokehouse during the storm. Her voice cracked. "He said he thought it looked like me." Elias felt the world grow still around them. "He said he saw two shadows inside," she continued, her hand shaking. "He didn't say your name, but Henry asked too many questions. Too calmly. That's how he gets before he becomes something else." Elias clenched his jaw. "Ma'am, I think Tom saw us. He spoke to me today. He was trying to make me say something that'd get both of us hurt," and pressed a hand over her mouth, eyes widening in panic. "Elias, Henry trusts Tom. If Tom suggests anything, he'll believe it." Her fear wasn't exaggerated. On plantations, suspicion was fuel. Gossip was a torch, and punishment came fast, often without evidence. "What do we do?" she whispered. Elias wished he knew. He had survived by keeping his head down, by being careful, by speaking little and working hard. But this was new. This was a lie he couldn't outrun, a danger he couldn't avoid by obedience alone. "We don't give them any reason to think there was something improper," he said, trying to steady his voice. "We stay away from each other, far as we can," and nodded, but there was a fear in her eyes deeper than anything he'd ever seen in her before. Then the back door opened with a sudden slam. Both froze. Henry Whitaker, her husband, stood in the doorway, silhouetted by lamplight. His tall frame filled the entrance, broad shoulders stiff, face unreadable from the distance. But his posture said everything. He had seen them, not touching, not talking closely, nothing incriminating, but close enough to twist into whatever story Tom had planted, and stepped back instantly, hands folding in front of her like she'd been caught outside at night as a child. Elias lowered his eyes to the dirt. Henry didn't speak. He didn't need to. His silence was louder than any words. Then he turned and went back inside. Anne's breath shuddered out of her. Elias stood perfectly still, but his thoughts ran wild. That single moment, the way Henry had looked at them, the cold anger in his stance, was enough to change the direction of their lives. Suspicion didn't need evidence. Suspicion was evidence. And Henry, proud, stern, jealous of social boundaries, would act on it. When Anne looked back at Elias, her voice was barely audible. "He thinks something happened," she whispered. "He thinks you and I that night." But Elias already knew. This wasn't just danger anymore. This was consequence. And it was coming fast. Night fell thick and heavy over the plantation. Not with peace, but with a pressure that made it difficult to breathe. Elias worked late, not because anyone told him to, but because returning to the slave quarters felt impossible while he knew danger was creeping closer with every hour. He kept replaying Henry's look on the back porch, stern, frozen, smoldering with the kind of suspicion that didn't fade with sleep. That kind of suspicion grew teeth. Lanterns glowed in the big house long after they usually dimmed. Shadows moved behind the curtains. Voices carried faintly through the open windows, muffled, sharp, rising and falling in clipped arguments. Elias didn't need to hear the words to know who was speaking. A husband and wife discussing something that had already gone too far. He was gathering broken fence rails near the paddock when he heard running footsteps. Soft, hurried, desperate. Before he could turn, a hand touched his arm lightly. "Elias!" Anne's whisper trembled. She stood there in a shawl thrown hastily around her shoulders, hair unpinned, breath uneven. She looked like she'd run from the house the moment she found an opening. "You can't be out here," Elias said, glancing toward the lit windows. "Not tonight. Not after." "He confronted me," she said, voice cracking, "after he saw us by the well. He asked where I'd been the night of the storm. Asked why I left my room at all. Asked why your name keeps coming up in whispers lately." She swallowed hard, struggling to catch her breath. "He kept asking the same questions over and over, as if trying to force me into confessing something that never happened." Elias clenched a railing so tightly a splinter pierced his palm. "What did you tell him?" "The truth," she said, hands shaking. "But he didn't believe me. Tom's poison has already seeped in. Henry thinks something improper happened that night. He thinks I betrayed him." Her eyes glistened, not with romantic sentiment, but with fear and frustration. "And he thinks you helped me do it." Elias looked up toward the big house windows again. "If he believes that, ma'am, he'll hurt me. And he'll hurt you for even standing here with me now." "I know," she whispered. "That's why I came. I'm not here to talk about myself. I'm here because he plans to punish you. And he was angry enough that I truly don't know what he might do." Elias felt his heartbeat drum loudly in his ears. Punishment wasn't an abstract word on a plantation. It meant the whip, the stocks, or worse. It meant a life altered in one night. "Why would you risk coming here to warn me?" he asked, voice low. "Because you don't deserve what's coming," she answered. "Because I won't let an innocent man suffer for something that never happened. Because you were kind to me that night. You saved me from falling in that smokehouse. You calmed me when I panicked. And I've already caused you enough harm just by being seen near you." A light flicked on upstairs. Elias stiffened and followed his gaze. "We don't have much time," she whispered urgently. "Henry stepped out earlier. He took his rifle, said he needed fresh air. He's looking for you, Elias. He's convinced that if he corners you alone, he'll make you confess to something you never did." Elias's stomach dropped. He felt the cold air cut sharper. "Where is he now?" Elias asked. "I don't know, but he's outside somewhere. He told Tom to stay close, because something's about to be dealt with." Her voice wavered. I think Tom is waiting near the barn. They're trying to trap you. Elias realized suddenly how quiet the yard had become. No voices, no footsteps. Too still. They were hunting him. Ma'am, he said, stepping back. You need to go inside. Right now. If they see you out here talking to me, it's over. Anne shook her head. No, I won't leave you to face this alone. You have to, he insisted. If Henry finds you here, he'll think he was right all along. You'll suffer too. A voice echoed faintly from the tree line. Elias. Henry's voice. Sharp, commanding. Nearer than expected. Anne's breath hitched. Elias looked around quickly. The dark offered little protection. The barn doors were half open but too far. The paddock fences gave no cover. Henry had chosen his battleground well. Another voice joined the first. Check near the pens. He was working there earlier. Tom. They were closing in fast. And grabbed Elias's sleeve, trembling. Please, please go. Go now. Go where? He asked softly. There ain't nowhere I can run on this land. She shook her head, tears forming. You can hide. At least until morning. I know a place. There's a crawl space under the old ice shed behind the smokehouse. No one uses it. No one even remembers it's there. I used to hide there as a child. Elias hesitated. Not because he doubted her, but because running would make him look guilty. Running was almost as dangerous as standing still. But a rifle in Henry Whitaker's hands was something else entirely. He'll kill you, Anne whispered, as if reading his thoughts. Or come close enough that it won't matter. Elias, please trust me. If you don't hide, this night will not end with you alive. He didn't have time to argue. A lantern beam swept across the yard, cutting a bright path across the grass. There, Tom shouted. I saw movement. Anne gasped. Elias turned instinctively, but the lantern was too far for them to know exactly where he was, yet too close to give him any chance if he stayed. Go, Anne whispered urgently. The ice shed. Now! Come with me, Elias said. If they catch you out here, Henry. No, she said firmly, wiping her tears. I'll go back to the house. I'll pretend I was in my room. You just survive. Please. Another lantern appeared. Then the unmistakable metallic click of a rifle being cocked. Elias didn't waste another second. With one last look, one heavy, shared moment of fear and silent hope, Elias dashed into the dark, keeping low as the lantern beams moved erratically. Behind him, Anne pressed a hand to her mouth to stifle a sob. She watched him vanish into the shadows just before Henry and Tom stormed into view. Henry's voice boomed across the yard. He's out here somewhere. And tonight I get the truth. And stepped backward, heart hammering, forcing herself to appear calm, to walk, not run, toward the house. She didn't dare look back. Because tonight, everything would break. And whatever happened next would change both their lives forever. The night held its breath as Elias ran, silent, swift, every step heavy with the knowledge that one wrong move could end his life before dawn. The shadows swallowed him as he moved behind the livestock pens, skirting the edge of the old orchard. Lantern beams flickered far behind, sweeping side to side in frantic arcs. Voices followed, but they were scattered, uncertain. He had slipped away just in time. The ice shed sat behind the smokehouse, half-rotted and sunken, more a forgotten relic than a building. Elias dropped to his knees and searched beneath the warped boards until his fingers brushed an opening, small but deep. He pressed himself into the darkness, pulling loose planks behind him to hide the entrance. The crawl space was cold, damp, filled with the faint smell of earth and old salt. But it was safety, thin, fragile safety, and he clung to it. Outside, footsteps pounded past. Someone cursed under their breath. Someone else called his name in a way that was not an invitation, but a threat. Then came the distinct crunch of Henry's boots. Tom, Henry snapped sharply. He was right here. He didn't get far. Tom huffed. He's hiding, sir. Bet he's tucked hisself away like a rat. But we'll find him. Henry's voice dropped lower, rougher. I'll make him talk when we do. Elias closed his eyes. In the silence of that cramped space, he could hear his own heartbeat loud enough to drown out the wind. The bitterness stung, how easily truth twisted into accusation, how swiftly a moment of human kindness had become a weapon used against them both. Time crawled. Lantern beams danced through the gaps in the boards. Once, Henry passed so close that Elias could see the outline of the man's legs through the cracks. The rifle barrel glinted as he turned. Elias held his breath until his lungs screamed. Eventually, after what felt like an hour or more, Henry's voice drifted farther away. Leave it. We'll take this up again in the morning. He can't run from the truth. Tom muttered something about checking the quarters at dawn. Their footsteps faded into the distance, leaving only the crickets and the quiet groan of the trees. Elias waited even longer before emerging. He stayed curled in the cramped darkness until the moon was high and the night had grown still again. Only then did he ease the boards aside and climb out slowly, carefully. The yard was empty. Lanterns extinguished. The big house finally dark. But he didn't dare return to the slave quarters. Not tonight. Not while Henry's rage simmered so close to the surface. Instead, he stayed in the shadows behind the shed until dawn, exhaustion gnawing at him but fear keeping him awake. The next morning came gray and hazy, with mist rolling over the fields. Elias wiped dirt and dust from his clothes and braced himself. Whatever punishment Henry had planned would arrive soon. There was no escaping that. But something unexpected happened. As he approached the path leading toward the work yard, he saw Henry Whitaker standing on the porch steps, staring out over the property as if searching for something he couldn't quite name. Tom was nowhere in sight, and stood a few steps behind him, hands clasped tightly, eyes fixed not on Henry, but on the yard Elias had to cross. Her face said everything: fear, guilt, determination, a silent apology for things out of her control. When Henry finally spotted Elias, the man's jaw clenched hard. His grip tightened on the railing. He started down the steps. Elias steadied his breath, but Anne's voice cut through the morning like a blade. Henry. The man stopped mid-step, surprised. Anne seldom used that tone. It was firm. It was steady. It was unshakably clear. We need to talk, she said. Henry turned, frowning. About what? About last night, she answered. Elias froze. His stomach tightened. This could ruin her. Ruin them both. A white woman didn't defend a black slave without consequence. Not in whispers, not in front of her husband, and certainly not in daylight. And stepped down 2 stairs, closing the space between her and her husband. Tom lied, she said simply. Henry blinked. What? He lied, she repeated. He came here with a story because he wanted something from you. Approval, importance, influence. I don't know. But he lied. And you believed him because you were angry at me. Henry stiffened but said nothing, and didn't waver. You asked where I was the night of the storm. You asked what Elias and I said to each other. I told you. Nothing happened. Nothing inappropriate. Nothing shameful. Her voice grew quieter, smaller, but somehow stronger. And I will not stand by while an innocent man pays the price for gossip whispered by someone who enjoys causing harm. Henry looked shaken, angry, yes, but confused too. He had expected guilt, or tears, or retreat. Not this. And, no, she said again, firmer now. You know me. You know my character. And you know I have never given you cause to doubt my loyalty. If you punish him for a lie, you will destroy someone who has done nothing wrong. Silence stretched long and thin. Elias stood motionless, head bowed, but every word hit him like thunder. She didn't have to do this. She shouldn't have done this. And yet she had. Henry finally looked over at Elias. The anger in his eyes dimmed, replaced by something more complicated. Embarrassment, maybe, or wounded pride. You stay out of trouble, Henry muttered gruffly. And stay away from my wife unless she sends for you. Understood? Elias nodded slowly. Yes, sir. Henry turned and walked back inside. The conversation, such as it was, finished in his mind. But Anne didn't move. She stood there another moment, looking at Elias across the yard, her expression heavy with everything she couldn't say aloud. Gratitude, regret, relief, sadness. Then she whispered, barely loud enough for him to hear, "I'm sorry, Elias, for all of this." He shook his head gently. "Ain't your fault, ma'am." A breeze stirred the leaves between them. For a few seconds, they simply stood there, two people on opposite sides of a line neither chose, but both had nearly been crushed by. Finally, Anne turned and followed her husband inside. Elias released a slow breath, the weight of the night settling deep inside him. He wasn't safe, not truly. Suspicion lingered like smoke after a fire. But he had survived, because she had spoken, because she had risked something precious. And he would remember that. He walked toward the fields as the sun rose, the grass glowing gold beneath his feet. Life on the plantation marched forward, unchanged on the surface, but something had shifted, not between them exactly, but inside them. A quiet understanding, a shared truth that no lie, no whisper, no threat could erase. That night in the smokehouse had become a shadow neither asked for. But how they faced the danger afterward, that was their choice. And though the world around them was harsh, cruel, and unforgiving, something human had survived beneath it. Something steady, something honest. In years to come, Elias would remember that night, that warning, that danger, and the woman who had spoken the truth when it mattered most. Not with longing, not with romance, but with the quiet respect of someone who had witnessed rare courage in a place where courage was often punished. And in her own quiet corners of memory, Anne would remember the same. How a single whispered warning had spiraled into a storm, how fear had nearly destroyed them both, and how standing up for the truth, even once, felt like reclaiming a piece of herself she'd thought long buried. Some stories don't end with triumph. Some don't end with justice, but they end with truth. And sometimes that's the only victory people in chains, visible or invisible, are allowed.